meeting to order. So this is the September 9th meeting of the Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance for the Township of Edwardsburg Cardinal. I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. And a special welcome, I see we have Mayor Todd from the town of Prescott with us tonight. Welcome, Mayor Todd. And next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Does someone have a motion to approve the agenda? I have Councillor Cameron moving and Deputy Mayor Deschamps seconding. Those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
The motion is carried. And the next item on the agenda is disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof.
None by
Any
me.
disclosures?
None by me.
No disclosures. The minutes will note that there were none. And now item number 4 on the agenda is business arising from the previous Committee of the Whole meeting, if any. Anyone have anything to bring forward from that meeting? Hearing none, I'm about to move on. And item number 5 on the agenda is delegations and presentations, and we have none this evening. So I'll proceed directly to item number 6 on the agenda, which is discussion items. And the first item up for discussion is the municipal modernization proposal, arena services, that I put in the package and gave notice of motion of it at the last meeting. And this is up for discussion. And I think everybody's had an opportunity to read the proposal. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through it, other than to answer any questions or to have a fulsome discussion as to if, as, and when to proceed, and if, as, and when to make any changes. So looking for a discussion. That's what you call a pregnant silence.
It certainly is. Mr. Mayor, you mentioned at one time that this was a very complex proposal. I somewhat utter your words. I really just don't know what to say at the moment.
Well, the essence of it is, I mean, our council would have to first of all endorse it before it would go anyplace. And that would mean a recommendation from this committee if members were so inclined. If not, it dies on the table. But it provides one mechanism, if I can put it that way, for sort of, I'm going to call modernization of arena services in the tri-municipal area, Augusta, Prescott, and Edwardsburg Cardinal. I have no reason to believe that one or either parties would sign it or be in agreement with it. Councillor Hunter.
Well, it is a very complex proposal. There's a lot of things covered in it. And as you say, it's a way to start a negotiation, I guess I would call it, of reaching what I would assume an equitable payment between ratepayers of the cost of recreation in the 3 townships. So whether it goes farther or not, but I would support it going forward to get into further discussion on it anyway, because I do think that Edwardsburg Cardinal has been carrying a heavy burden for recreation and arenas and over the last quite a number of years, especially ever since we amalgamated with Cardinal, that we've been paying for 2 arenas all the time. And I think this is a way to at least start the talk on equalized payment between the townships. So.
Appreciate those comments. Mr. Bradley.
Yeah, on item 9, if a third arena is to be built, financed from the grants, the wording is 3 municipalities share in the operating capital costs of all 3 arenas. Does this concept include the original capital to build the arena?
Well, that's the concept. As you can see from the excuse me. As you can see from the chart on page 2, our taxpayers right now are participating in both the principal and the interest of the Cardinal Arena for 2 years, for 1 year there, that was for 2 years in 2017 and 2018. So our costs, principal and interest, are about $303,000 a year. So the concept was, if there was a third arena, it would just be added into the mix. But there was there's a sort of a qualification on that, which comes up on on clause 10. And the qualification is that the proposal in front of you is premised on the success of the ICIP application to fund a major portion of the capital costs, and as a result of which the partners would contribute no more than 26% of the total capital, which is the way the ICIP program is set up, as I understand it. Now, I think I got that understanding from Councillor Dillabaugh.
It is.
That's right.
It is.
You're saying to a maximum, at least you cover your rear end, Mr. Mayor, at $3 million.
Well, your rear end.
Believe me, not mine, but. We have nothing actually in writing, that's my problem. I mean, we have no commitment. I mean, you're hoping that it doesn't go over 12 million in the arena. What happens if it goes 18?
Well, all I can go by at this point in time is what I see in the press, because we haven't had any direct discussions with either of the other two parties.
You mentioned there's been no discussion, no direct discussions, but I assume there's been sort of conversations that kind of if this, blah, blah, blah. Like, I just wonder if the taxpayers of Augusta are gonna want to, incur additional costs across the entire township, capital costs, for an asset they don't have any ownership in. Now, are they gonna have an ownership in these arenas, in that sense, or?
Well, that's not the concept that you see in front of you.
Right.
The concept that you see in front of you is that the owners would remain the owners.
So,
But everybody participates in the use of the.
no, I recognize that, yeah. And would have a right to participate in, if they were contributing to it, but like these buildings and equipment, et cetera, are part of our, tangible asset plan. And so we're putting funding away through our reserve funds and planning, et cetera, for replacement, renovation, repair, et cetera. And I just wonder if, if I was a taxpayer in Augusta, I'd be saying, count me out, boys, you know what I mean? Because I don't have any ownership in that.
Okay, so if I can just, sort of try to get back to what's on the table here. I mean, I don't want to presume as to what the other two parties might or might not do. My whole intention of putting this forward here in this format was to see whether or not this committee would make a recommendation to our council to put it forward. I mean, if our council is not prepared to put it forward, then it just dies.
Yeah.
And otherwise everything is just hypothetical.
I like the idea of, versus trying to recover a contribution via hourly rates and so on. I really like that idea. I just wonder if the concept should be more general and not put it into, any form, cast it in concrete at this point in time type of thing.
How would you reduce it to a more
I guess
general?
what I would do is, say a conceptual, a concept. And that the concept is that the three municipalities would entertain the idea of shared operating expenses and capital, ongoing capital, that should go to an advisory sub-council, a committee of the 3 municipalities that look at all the details, and especially at the design of any potential new arena. Because by design, you can say, well, you kind of limit it to 8, 9 million, 10 million. If you get really interested in letting your imagination run with you, you can get up to 15, 16 million in no time. You know?
Well, if I can just address that, because what we started with, I mean, I think we've floated a number of concepts when the idea of replacing the Prescott Arena first came out. And since that time, we've floated a number of concepts for a sort of a sharing, if I can put it that way. One of which was along the lines that you suggested, whereby we sort of form a 3-party committee to kind of conceptualize, design, and proceed to something. And so we kind of floated that idea a bit, just through the back channels, if I can put it that way. And it didn't really catch any traction. So I had to, and now we're at the stage where ICIP applications opened up on September the 3rd, I think it was, and the deadline for applications is November the 12th, I think it is. And so we're at the stage where we really don't have a lot of time here, if there's to be a partnership. So I had to kind of take the original concept and put a little bit more meat on the bones, if I can put it that way, just so that we could advance the, if it's gonna go, just so we could advance the discussion. I see Councillor Cameron wants in.
Mr. Mayor, I'd somewhat like to see this go a little bit further, and I would recommend that we strike the committee and we sit down and do some talking and see where it goes from there.
Well, we can't strike any committee. All we can do is appoint 2 people.
Well, that's exactly my words. Exactly, we would have a committee that we could go to, let's put it that way, if the feeling was there with the other 2 municipalities. So I would just like to see go a little further.
Like that committee, in my mind, would explore all kinds of details that we don't really do here. Like
Yes.
what kind of sharing is going to be the most appropriate? I mean, Prescott has the smallest population of the 3 municipalities. So would it be done equally or on a, I don't know, I mean, I haven't even thought about it, you know, how you do it, but it could be done on a per capita basis or on a per tax property basis or whatever, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But there's all kinds of, that kind of detail, I think, that would have to be explored.
Right, yeah, and I realize that this is just what I would call a very,
Just opening
yeah,
salvo.
because this is just a third kind of look at
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Anybody else want into this discussion? Okay, the chair's looking for direction. I have some expressions of confidence or expressions of interest to proceed from Councillor Hunter and Councillor Cameron. Some reservations, I think by Mr. Bradley, but I'm interpreting that to mean broad general acceptance with reservations, if I can put it that way. So I'm putting you in that category. Anybody else want to weigh in and let me know where they stand here?
Having been part of an original CAO mayor, deputy mayor discussion in Augusta with the first meeting with just Augusta and then the second one with Prescott, looking back on just several discussions that happened in those meetings. I haven't been around since then, and I don't know if they've halted or if this is a culmination of something that came out of them. The last one that I was involved in, it seemed like we weren't going to come to this form of a motion. I was kind of surprised to actually see it. And I thought, or at least I was under the impression that continued CAO discussions on all modernization in respect to all recreation were still ongoing. So I understand the proposal that you're putting forward. I just thought that we were on our way towards remaining non-supportive of the arena submission, but with the potential down the line at working towards some form of a tri-municipal agreement on operations at a later date. Maybe I missed that, but
No, I think you're pretty accurate there. I'm gonna let the CAO jump in here, if you don't mind, and sort of kind of bring us up to date on where the CAO discussions are, if you wouldn't mind, a kind of a broad general brushstroke there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The tri-municipal meeting that was held on July 30th directed the CAOs to take the low-hanging fruit, if I can put it that way. We have had one meeting with respect to library services, but there's been nothing further with respect to recreation.
And that's, so the last CAO meeting was July the 30th?
No, I'm sorry, that was the tri-municipal council meeting. CAOs met on August 27th, I believe it was.
Okay, and what was the meeting here of the three councils? What date was that?
July the 30th.
July the 30th, okay. So I mean, and I guess really to pick up on your point, what really precipitated this is the fact that the ICIP application period did open up, you know, so that's really what's behind pushing this, or playing, I'm not pushing this, I don't want anybody to think I'm pushing this. I'm putting a proposal on the table. I was asked along the way, is this a recommendation? And I said, no, it's not a recommendation, it's a proposal. I just want to see what the discussion is going to be, and I want to have the discussion in an open and transparent fashion. So go ahead.
yeah, I'm just curious as if there are continued CAO mayor discussions in regards to recreation. If so, does this compromise those ongoing discussions?
Okay, so as far as
If there are I mean, after the first two, I wasn't invited back for the next one, so, pointing out that if those discussions are continuing and they have the potential of forming some form of an agreement, does this put those further discussions at risk?
okay, let me answer it this way. There are no further discussions. So, chair's looking for direction. I mean, I can take the lack of additional questions or discussions as a termination of the issue and move on with the agenda.
I just have one more question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I dropped my pen. So with support of this as it goes forward, is that a suggestion from council that we endorse the application that Prescott is putting forward? And if so, are we including our name on that application as, a three-party application? And does that idea hinge on support of this proposal as presented?
Okay, so in answer to that question, adoption of this proposal by all three parties would be a sine qua non condition for support of the application. In other words, without such support, we would not endorse that application in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, because I would struggle without a very broad recreation, like a long-term, contract amongst the three municipalities to agree to a design proposal or an application as it's being down the road towards operations, no problem. But as the project as presented, I would struggle endorsing it.
Okay, so let me sort of answer that question in these terms. This proposal envisages that if it gains support at the Edwardsburg Cardinal Council table, the next thing that would happen would be a legal agreement between the three entities if they were so inclined. If they were not so inclined, we wouldn't even proceed to have that legal agreement drawn, if I can put it that way. And this would form sort of the basis of a legal agreement between the three parties to proceed on an ongoing basis. Now, to get back to the nub of your question, which is the fact that we have not, at this point in time, had any input into design criteria, costing, etc., which is Mr. Bradley's point. I think that the time for that is past in view of the fact that we've got this November the 12th deadline looming for this current intake application. So, I mean, this is just my way of saying, you know, here's one last final opportunity to kick the cat if we choose to do so. And no, without any kind of an idea of how it would be received by the other two parties. And, you know, if you look at it from a realistic point of view, today's the 10th of September, I think? Yeah, the 10th? No, the 9th. Today's the 9th. If you look at it from a realistic point of view, our council couldn't endorse this until earliest September the 23rd. Time to get a leak, well, then it would have to go to the other two parties in some way, shape, or form, and I would suggest, I'm changing my mind here, because in clause number, let me just find it here. Oh, in the last paragraph, it's recommended that upon acceptance of this proposal, the Council of the Township of Edwardsburg Cardinal, full council visits to council meetings of each of the other two municipalities to be arranged. And I'm changing my mind about that because I think there's not time for that. I think the only thing we would have time for is for the CAOs to take it back to their respective councils and see whether or not they're gonna endorse it. But let's allow a month for that process. Now we're at the end of September. Time to get a legal agreement put together after that, another month. You're right up against the end of October. You're almost up against the November 12th deadline. So you know, it would have to be full speed ahead with all parties to make this work, but it's a shot in the dark. And I know it's a shot in the dark. I just think it deserves a discussion. Councillor Hunter.
I'm not that, I'm like Mr. Bradley, I'm not too keen about getting into a partnership agreement if we don't know the cost of a new arena and one thing and another, but as I said, I think we need to put some proposal forward to try to get some equitable pay in their operation and costs of these arenas. Either that or Edwardsburg's gonna have to sit down and figure out a non-residential rate for people using our arenas, because our people are paying way too much for the operation of these arenas for the amount of people in our township that actually use them, so.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, our people are in for, you know, $440,000 over and above and after expenses. So you want it back in again, and then I don't know where I'm going from here.
Yeah, well,
so Deputy Mayor and then Mr. Bradley.
You definitely stole a lot of my further points to what I was saying about, you know, such a short timeline. But again, you know, I struggle with the idea that we endorse a three-way agreement based on whether, long-term, whether or not we will have an agreement on operations. But, you know, what happens if we don't, but yet we do put our name behind the application? Then all we've done is support the application.
No, but this ties in operations.
Yeah, but what happens if, what happens though if the November deadline comes and goes, we've supported the application.
No, we won't do that unless we have the agreement in place. That's the point I'm
Legal
trying to make.
agreement has to be in place.
That's the point I'm trying to make. The legal agreement has to be in place.
And so you're really putting it up against a really short eight-week timeline for councils to adopt, pass, consider, and get back and form a legal agreement.
Yes, you're right. It's a really short
And
timeline.
I know I've said it once before, and I just say it again, just, for a further operational agreement, I just worry about, an aggressive proposal presented on such a short amount of time, working against us.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I think we're conflating a couple of things here, at least from a conceptual point of view. And I just didn't realize it when I read this briefing package earlier in the weekend. This grant program deadline is after the election.
Yes.
And we don't know what the election's going to hinge on or what the results are going to be. And we're worried about this compressed timeline because the grant opened up on early September and closes on November 12th. If let's take a suppose, for example, that government changes, the program gets stripped back somehow, and delayed, either way. Basically, that extends the entire decision process that the town of Prescott's going to be faced with respect to moving forward on the program. So I don't think that this short time frame we're worried about is really a factor that we should, get too worried about. I think if the concept of cooperation is strong enough, then I think what we do is we explore that irrespective of the fact this is going to occur after the election. The decision of getting the grant or not getting the grant. The chances are with the finances of this country, that if the opposition party wins, some of these items are going to get stripped.
Well, so there's two things to be considered around your observations. The first is that applications under this program go to the province. That's the first thing, and the province then weighs those applications by whatever criteria they set out. And I've heard it said that one of the criteria that province will use is whether or not there are partnerships involved in the proposals or the applications that come forward. So the way I'm looking at it is November the 12th is the deadline to get the application to the province. Now the province will, the political realities within the province won't change. But the funding, which is at the federal level, may or may not change or be delayed. So final decisions at that level may or may not be delayed. And with the change of government, almost certainly will. But the issue is still the fact that the ICIP application process is open. And we've known that it's been coming for some period of time, and we're probably late getting this proposal on the table, but it's not as if we haven't been sort of kicking things around in the meantime. But the September 3rd opening of the applications and the November 12th deadline for the submissions of the applications, those are the two things that aren't going to change. In my mind, I don't think they will. Now, the last minute, the province can say, well, we're prepared to extend this deadline by 30, 60, or 90 days, and they may say that on the basis of what happens in the federal election, but we don't know that.
No.
you know. Okay, where am I going here, folks? Chair's looking for direction.
So
Okay.
are we gonna take take a vote on it? I mean,
I
how do you
don't-
know whether or not
I'm
the council?
I'm not sensing enough support here for really a consensus call, really. And what I'm sensing is that, I'm sensing that there are too many unanswered questions at the last minute. And, if I've got that feeling correct, and I only see really two really strong expressions of proceed, and that's Cameron and Hunter, with some reservations by Bradley. I'm not really inclined to take a consensus call, and you know, I'm quite prepared to just see this kind of float into the never never land. I think we've had a discussion, and that's what we should have done, and maybe we're too late, and if we are, we are.
I like the idea, but having skin in the game. But I don't know how much skin I got in the game.
Well, you know you're limited to 2 million, to 3 million. You know you're limited to 3 million, right? You know you're limited to 3 million max capital. You don't know what you're limited, you have no limit as far as operating.
No, I understand that.
Yeah, that's the thing that
It's the
scares
capital.
me.
It's the long-term debt that
I mean, if you had a guarantee of the other two mayors signed, sealed, and delivered, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable. But right now, the whole saying is, there's lots of if and buts, and you know that.
Yeah.
If and buts are candy and nuts, we all have a Merry Christmas. So, that's my feelings on it.
Okay, so, you know, feelings of hesitation and concern. So I'm gonna mark you in that column. Okay, well, we've had a discussion, which is what I really wanted to have, and I'm gonna curtail discussion on that until someone else must bring it back on the table, either at this meeting or at another meeting. And we'll go ahead with our agenda here, if I can find it again, there it is. So I'm on now then to item number 7 on the agenda, which is the second quarter bylaw report update. And we have that in front of us with the briefing note. And this is the report submitted by Mr. Buffett and Mr. Lalonde. And we now have the report from the months of April, May, and June, I believe it is. And I'll open the floor for discussion first of all, and we'll go around the table. Councilor Hunter.
Read this report over, and I'm sure the same as everybody else did in this room, and we keep seeing number of phone calls, emails, and visits and stuff, and I know we can't have names, that's quite obvious, but to me, I think there must be a file number. I'd like to see a file number listed someplace here, so we know that, well, okay, we'll take Cardinal, for example, there's a clean yard visit in April there, the numbers 1, 2, 3 across, then we go down, and next month we got a number of Cardinal 211. We don't know whether this is the same place he's going to visit, or whether this is a different file, or I'd like to see a file number beside them, so we can look down and say, okay, he spent 5 different episodes on this file number in April, well, there's that same file number again down here in May, another 5 or 6 visits. Give us an idea whether it's just the same one, or whether these are all different ones on here, so.
Well, I'm gonna say this, I'm glad you brought that concept forward, because one of the things we've been looking for is names, which they tell us we're not allowed to have. And the other thing we've been looking for and asking for over a period of time is property numbers, or that kind of thing. But your concept of a file number really, it really rings a lot of resonance with me. And let's just leave that concept hanging for a minute. We'll go around the table with the report, and then let's have a discussion on the concept of assigning file numbers to these complaints and getting this report back by file number. So as you can see, as you say, we can see what effort is being expended on the files. Any other questions? I'm just going around this way, Deputy Mayor.
No comments as of right now.
Councillor Cameron.
Yes, I'd just like some clarification. It says here, and I'm just going under April, just to make things easy, the second entry under April, it says Cardinal. I understand that. Clean yards, I take it somebody made a complaint about clean yards. And then it says phone call. Is that a phone call, a follow-up from us, or was that a phone call lodging the complaint?
I'm assuming this is effort, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
It's, this indicates the activity that the bylaw officer has undertaken.
Okay, so it's calls from our bylaw, okay, and that would go across for the rest of it.
So he's-
That's all I have right now,
So he's made one phone call,
yeah.
2 emails,
Yeah. and
3 site
3 site
visits. and it's an ongoing
Yeah,
project. And that's, I think, where Councillor Hunter is coming from, because if that same file number was to appear twice in April, and then again in May, and then again in June,
yeah.
we would then begin to see the accumulation of effort. Councillor Dillabaugh.
But you see it now, Mr. Mayor, I mean, there, for example, April, 2 phone calls, 1 email, that's number 2, 5 site visits, and it's still open. Like, how many times do we have to go and beat the horse? I don't get it, no, seriously though, I mean, like 2 phone calls, 1 email, and 5 visits, and it's still open?
What's OTC mean?
Order to comply, Mr. Mayor?
Order to comply. So it was 2 phone calls, 1 email, 5 site visits, and then he issued a notice
Yeah.
to comply, and then he issued an order to comply.
Right.
And the order to comply is open.
Mhm.
The case is open.
The case is open, right. Yeah.
But it's not cleaned up.
Maybe, maybe not. If I may, Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
just to sort of condense the discussion a little bit, Councillor Hunter's point is well made about file numbers. And actually, when we get to item 7D, where we talk about the complaint handling software, that's exactly what happens. We get an assigned service request number, and that's what you'll see when we start pulling the reports from that software. Just
So,
for, on a go forward.
okay, are there any other questions with this report as we see it?
Is there some importance between the bold print and the non-bold print?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bradley. That indicates, a bold print indicates that it's a new item in that month.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay, so those are new complaints.
Yeah. And the non-bold are continuing, in other words.
Holdover, yeah.
Like this, the total complaints seem to be the most, I haven't counted them, so I'm just kind of eyeballing it, but clean yard seems to be the big deficiency. And then maybe animal after that, but I felt we were making some headway with our message about clean yards and so on. And yet we still get these appearing on our report, each time we review it. So I wonder if there's some way that we should be thinking of a program to push the idea. I know, Mr. Mayor, you've done that over the past council period, and this current council, periodically in your reports you've talked about it. But I don't know, they seem that maybe there's other way to get our message through.
All ears. I'm all
I haven't
ears.
thought about it very much in terms of what you could do, but
Well, Mr. Bradley, one of the things that we can do is allocate more dollars and more money to the effort. You know, I mean, we all sat around this table at budget time, and we were all content, or maybe not content, but we all, in the final analysis, we were the ones that allocated 10 hours per week, and that's really all the staff has got to work with.
I know.
And maybe, and in my opinion, what we need is maybe just a shade more aggressive approach here. Councillor, or Deputy Mayor, did you want to get in here?
Yeah, just quick, there's a lot of open still, like, ton of ongoing, and then say, go back to April, and excuse my ignorance, but like, order to comply, returned awaiting approval. So that means that we've heard back from the order to comply, and what exactly does waiting approval mean? So like illegal dump, Spencerville, OTC returned, waiting approval. Like, it just seems like there's a ton of open still, like almost everything from April is still open.
If I may, Deputy Mayor Deschamps, the open cases, you know, sometimes what we see, often what we see is, especially in a clean yards situation, is we'll follow up, we'll start to see some action. We leave the case open, we have an order to comply, but if we've started to get compliance, we don't close it, but neither do we pursue any further prosecution. And then things start to backslide and we sort of start the process over again. To be completely truthful, I'm not sure what that returned awaiting approval one is about illegal dumping. Maybe Mr. Lalonde knows?
Well, I can suspect on what it is. Illegal dumping is really kinda hard to prove who dumped their garbage on the side of the road, so in this case, I can only assume that Mr. Buffett issued the order to comply, and it was returned, and he was probably waiting for approval or something to get the garbage actually cleaned up ourselves.
I mean, I did use that as an example, but it was more that, my question was more that it's not unusual, especially being so many months into this, but it's not unusual to have it ongoing for a long period of time. Then I think, as the CAO has indicated, it sometimes the files will stay open like 6 months, that kind of thing, or even longer.
Sometimes longer.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions on this report before I move on? Councillor Hunter, we're gonna get to your concept of file numbers here shortly, I think. Okay, so then 7B, bylaw enforcement policy, second draft. And we had asked a second draft to come forward on that enforcement policy. And second draft has been circulated now with changes from the first draft, shown as stroked out blues and added blues. And I'm just looking for a discussion on this second draft. Councilor, or Deputy Mayor Deschamps.
Thank you. My only concern, I really liked all of the changes. It seemed to really address the general nature of the comments that we gave back. One that I had specifically though, and it just sort of came up again, was that we seem to have a varying degree of compliance and acceptance of what compliance means. And one of my concerns was that I was looking more specifically for a definition of compliance. What exactly constitutes a compliance? You know, because you can certainly go from property to property to property, and comparatively, what constitutes a compliance to an order?
So if I can just answer that as we've experienced it in the past, I think part of the answer is that the bylaw enforcement officer has certain discretionary powers, and he can say, okay, well, I'll accept that that's compliance, or he can say, no, that doesn't meet the standard of the neighborhood. And different times they've talked about the standard of the neighborhood. So, for example, we might not apply the same standard of grass, your front lawn grass is cut, we might not apply that same standard in, you know, the property at the end of Cedar Grove Road as we would the property on Dundas Street in Cardinal. Because the standard of the neighborhood might be different. The same with garbage cleanup and brush cleanup and stuff like that. Now, that's just my understanding. That's the understanding that I have obtained as to what compliance means, and I'll let the CAO and maybe Mr. Lalonde speak to that issue as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarification, Deputy Mayor Deschamps, we're talking about standard for what compliance means specifically with respect to clean yards.
Yes, clean yards, sorry, yes, clean yards.
I think the mayor's points are well made, that there has to be some allowance for discretion. We have pretty specific things in the clean yards bylaw about, you know, grass can only be so long, and that's throughout the township. There's only certain numbers of vehicles permitted to be parked, and they have to be parked in the driveway. It's just very difficult to hold everyone to exactly the same standard. People live quite differently, and I think there has to be some allowance for discretion.
So, if I may,
Go ahead.
then we have a definition then of what the lowest level of allowable maintenance would be. And if compliance would be expected, that it would come to the lowest level of maintenance. Is that fair?
Go ahead.
I'm just still struggling on applying a speed limit differently to everyone.
Speed has an objective measurement.
It's never. A compliance ability to everyone differently. I struggle if we're going to work towards, and I believe we really should, towards a stringent clean yards bylaw where everyone takes a measure of pride in ownership, and we hold them to what's acceptable. I think that should be applied equally to everyone.
Fair comment. Councillor Hunter.
I can see that you gotta give the enforcement officer a little leeway for common sense along. You can't expect to go into an agricultural area of the township and expect the barnyards out there to be kept at the same standards of what the yards in a residential area is. I think there's gotta be a different area. If you struggled with this for years, and you've been on council before, of bringing up property standards bylaws and how, when you got a mixed, great for a town, like a town of Prescott or a town of Campbell, they can easily put a property standards bylaw in, because it's all residential areas. When you start going over a whole township, you got industrial areas and agricultural areas and then hamlets, they won't let you define on a property standards bylaw that you can segregate people out. This one's gotta do that, this one's gotta do that. But in our clean yards bylaw, we can do that. We can have discretionary there, so I agree, it's hard when you see compliance, what compliance means in a town and what compliance means in the thing, and like we see it, and I know where he's coming from certain dealings we've had. They say, well, he cleaned the yard up with the next door neighbor that's got everything flowers and roses and trimmed up grass, and they've got wildflowers growing all over the dooryard here that they, well, I didn't comply, but
Compliance is a tough one. Mr. Robertson.
I think in the big picture though, when you drive around the township, people take a lot of pride in their property, and for the most part, they really do make quite an effort to keep it clean. But, I mean, there's always the rotten apple in the barrel, and probably never gonna change.
But the whole point is though, that those people that do take pride in their property and do have respect for property values deserve to be protected from the other ones that don't. Because it does affect property values in the neighborhood, whatever that neighborhood may be. The values are affected, there's just no question about it. And we've heard that here in this at this table over the last 3 or 4 months. Anybody else want to weigh in here?
Not
Okay, so the issue on the table is this bylaw enforcement policy. The question is, are we prepared to recommend this particular draft be adopted by council, or do you want more time for reflection and discussion? Because if there's not going to be more time for reflection and discussion, then the recommendation could be changed, recommend that draft 2 of the bylaw enforcement policy be adopted by council. Right now, the staff recommendation is leaving us a bit of leeway. So I need, and the chair is looking for direction, where do you wanna go here? Deputy Mayor?
I'm very comfortable with the changes that addressed all of our initial concerns. I didn't find any other than compliance in there, and I think that compliance is definitely going to be a 12-part definition, so, that Kevin has to write. So, I'm comfortable with the bylaw, as written, and I would move that council accept, or that committee recommend that bylaw enforcement be adopted by, the draft be adopted by council.
I'd second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so I'm gonna call this Deputy Mayor Deschamps and seconded by Councillor Dillabaugh. I'm gonna just read the recommendation one more time. That committee recommend that bylaw enforcement policy draft 2 be adopted by council.
Correct.
Further discussion, if any? Hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. Thank you. All right, now then I'm on to the tax sale update. And we have a little report here from the treasurer. Closing date for 2 properties on September the 4th. I guess the thing that interests me is the nebulousness here. Where are the 2 properties? They were up for tax sale, so they can't be private information.
Well, no, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I guess I assumed you knew.
I didn't know which one.
The one that was redeemed was the vacant lot on Crowder Road, and the one that was sold successfully was the, what was the car wash and laundromat in Cardinal.
So those 2 are out of our hair, is that the idea?
Well, soon.
Soon.
We will know for sure by September 20th.
Oh yes, the successful bidder has 14 days to pay the remaining bid amount or loses deposit day. Oh, yeah. So, now I understand from discussions that there's a couple more coming, is that the idea?
I believe there's one,
They're staggered. We did a staggering of several, so the next ones would probably be October or November. It depends on the, real tax is the one that helps to set the tax sale dates. So we have to have an 8-week lead time before we can actually, because we have 4 weeks to advertise. So we have about an 8-week lead time before we do the next.
Okay, but can we not submit anytime we want?
No, they have final notices that go out after the date of, like, the year's up. Then a final notice goes out to the property owner. And then in that final notice period of time, that's when then we act on doing the actual sale.
Okay, so how many more properties have we got that are eligible for sale as of December the 31st, 2018?
If in recall, I can think we've got, in 2019, we'll probably have about 3 more potential this year. They're all staggered for the next 6 months or more.
Okay, so you're saying on December the 31st, 2019, we'll have 3 more on top of how many from 18?
In terms of, for tax sale itself, they actually advertising a tax sale, or just going into tax?
No, advertising the sale.
Only the 3 between now and the end of the year potential.
Okay, so that's 3 that
were noticed over a year ago.
Yep.
And they haven't paid within that year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so there's 3.
yeah.
Okay, and will all 3 of them go out in October or November?
It really depends on, I mean, like I say, they get final notice sent out, and they still have opportunity to pay after those final notices are sent.
Yeah.
And so,
as soon as we can, we'll get them out
Yeah.
there.
You know, I'm just curious, because the people are looking, people are asking. Okay,
Hold on, can I ask
Go ahead.
one question, if I'm not allowed to ask this question, just cut me off, but with the two properties, the one that was redeemed was last day? Is that okay
The
to
day
ask?
before.
If it's
Day
not,
before. No,
The day
it's fine, day before.
and so was there, expected correspondence with them to your follow-up email, or did they just wait till the last day?
Through the chair, I actually had quite a bit of conversation with the gentleman. He's out of province. And so, yeah, I was back and forth with emails and phone calls with him during the duration of the, started in about July, and had conversation with him through emails and phone calls until he was able to come up with the money.
So the deadline date really forced the hand.
It definitely did.
So with the one that wasn't redeemed, was there any correspondence in regard to that one as well?
Not to the same extent as the other, no.
But we did have in-person visits
Yeah,
from the
in
owner.
person.
okay,
So,
Mr.
Mr.
Robertson.
Mayor, that's now reduced from 3 years to 2 years to register.
That's correct.
Okay, I'm moving on. So next one is 7D, complaint handling and the citywide works software review. I think you're referring to this for Mr. Hunter's, or Councilor Hunter's talk about file numbers.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you would just take a quick peek at I'm gonna let the treasurer speak to this, she's far more familiar with this than I am, but on the backside, the graph of the dashboard that you see printed there, you see where the service request total of 923. Each of those service requests has a file number associated with it. So we're working right now towards getting our staff at 100% compliance in using this system, so that everything that comes in ends up as a service request, whether it's generated by myself personally, or by a resident calling in, or by one of yourselves letting us know about a problem. We're not quite to 100% compliance. It's difficult out in the field to add things in as you go, but that's where those service request numbers will come from when we are ready to produce we can produce a report on bylaw enforcement from the citywide works module now. Unfortunately, it's a little skewed because not every complaint gets in here yet, but we are working towards that.
Okay, but the question from me, out of those 923 service requests, they're not all bylaw enforcement issues.
No, not at all.
So as your staff is inputting these into the system, do they have a mechanism to categorize the service request as a yards bylaw complaint, a dog complaint, a skunk complaint?
Yes.
They do?
Mhm. Yep.
All right, and then each one will have a file number. Then presumably, when we get our reports, we'll get them by file number.
Mhm.
Now, will the file number identify the location? For example, these 3 files are from Cardinal.
Yeah.
Those 17 are from Spencerville.
Yep.
And these 12 are from Gary Owen.
Yes, sir.
You'll know that,
Yes.
okay? All right, so
Well,
then,
know
and
that
as I say,
exists in the map of Canada.
Yeah, it's just a work in progress to make sure that we're actually getting everything in there.
well, we would appreciate the staff getting on board with your program as quickly as possible, because I think you can see from the table that this council is interested in pursuing this.
Sure, and if I may, Mr. Mayor, I'd ask the treasurer just to speak to the actual information item, because there's some good information in there, with respect to why it's taking as long as it is to get it done, as well as if you'll recall, when Mr. Baptista was here and gave us a presentation on his Query Fox program, one of the reasons I didn't pursue that is because we have something similar here, but Mrs. Stubbs can explain it better than I do.
Okay, and then I have, we give the treasurer an opportunity, then I have Councillor Dillabaugh.
Sure. Through the chair, so just to, as a background, as you can see in the background, we did purchase the Citywide Works module after buying the asset management module from PST in May of 2018. And so it was a fairly significant cost, but there was admin training, which both the Director of Operations and myself took. Over a period of time, I think we did the 2.5 days of training, started in June and finished about October of 2018. And it was us setting the system up with respect to users, their permissions, setting up the communities, like when you say, is it going to be, can we identify whether it was in Cardinal or Spencerville or Johnstown? And one of the things that we didn't purchase when we did the original purchase was having PSD do the integration or the database. We felt we wanted, because it was such a new system, we wanted people to get an understanding of how to put a service request in. So we thought rather than have a database being just uploaded, we would create the database as we went along. We didn't feel that we needed everybody in the township in this particular system right away. And it was costly, the $7,200. But what we're finding is it's slowing the process of entering. So some staff members are finding it difficult to enter a service request just because the steps in adding a customer, adding a property is a little more involved than we anticipated. So what I'm in the process of doing is I took the database from our Munisoft, which is our tax software, and downloaded that into an Excel spreadsheet, which is what Citywide would have done as well, to upload it into this system. And in so doing that, probably 3 or 4 days of me, I'm on T, the letter T, and it wasn't all, the database is not as clear or as delineated as it should be. So we would have incurred similar problems if we just take the database and had PSD upload it. So I think we've saved the money, but I think in saving the money, we've also had a better handle of what that data that we put into the system initially is going to be looking like. So having said that, the other thing that QueryFox is offering is this customer integration system, which we still have an ability to purchase from Citywide. It is a cost of $8,500, but it's only a $1,000 annual support fee, which is fairly reasonable. We wouldn't want to do that until we got our staff actually working fully comfortable with the system. The system is actually relatively easy, but it's still one of those things that's habitual. You have to make it become part of your daily activity. And some people are still not in that mindset, so we have to try to make it easier for them. And I'm hoping the database loaded in will make it a little easier for everybody to use. So the service request that we're talking about is what we are showing is the start point. And then if we find a service request needs to go, it's going to take us a little longer to deal with this particular matter, then we would create a work order. So we're going to close the service request and we're going to create a work order where we progress through processes. The service request initially just sends an email to the department that's applicable to, and then it's on the onus on the department to determine whether they can close that service request on the initial. You know, they can deal with the matter and it's all dealt with, so either a phone call or they go pick up the garbage or whatever that is and they close the service request. Or is it something that they can't deal with right now, so they've got, because it's like maybe the middle of winter and we have to wait till the snow melts before we can go and, you know, deal with the issue. They'll set a workout order up and then target a date for them to respond back at a later date. So the system has great functionality, and I know there's several of the department managers themselves are taking use of it quite a bit. Public Works is our main driver with preventative maintenance and scheduling of all the MTO inspections, that type of thing. It has a lot of functionality that way to keep, it's kind of our online logbook, if you can say.
Okay, well, I'm gonna let Counselor Dillabaugh jump in here, and then I have some questions. Counselor?
I guess is this your recommendation then, is to purchase this,
No, we've actually purchased the software and it's been in place for quite a while.
this new data analyst, so we
The-
purchased this?
Integration, we haven't purchased, no.
So
And
is that,
I'm not making that recommendation at this point in time,
oh, you're not?
no,
Perhaps in the 2020 budget.
potential.
Oh, okay, now what's the difference, like 8,500 between that Cory Fox? Did we ever get a price on it, or
I did.
yes, no, or?
I did, if I may, the quote for the Prairie Fox was based on population, and it was somewhere between $8,000 and $9,000 per year.
Pretty much the same as here, isn't it?
Except it's an extra database that you have to search looking for things, so we felt that the $8,000 here is much better invested, because then we only have one software to do.
Okay, but when we spend this 8,500, then the ongoing support is 1,000 a year.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop, well, follow-up question?
Just one, and that's our service request, our average like completion, 76 days, eh? It's long.
Well,
I'm not, you know, I'm
yeah,
not,
no,
I'm not,
we looked at, we were surprised too, Counselor, I don't mind telling you, I was a little taken aback by that, but when we got looking at it, it's really to do with things like what Mrs. Stubbs just mentioned, you know, if we get a call from a property owner in February and says, your
Just call.
plow just took up my sod, we can't fix it until May, we just can't, so
oh, yeah,
it
okay.
stays open for those.
So that stays open, that's why it goes 76 days or all.
It's 120 days. and-
Yeah, yeah, no, I see.
Okay, so Deputy Mayor wants in?
Just for quick clarification, I got some comments later on too, but did I understand you right when you said Query Fox was 8,000 to 9,000 per year?
That's correct.
Oh, holy. So the other one is only 8,500, it meshes with the module you already use, and its ongoing is 1,000.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. It's kind of a no-brainer. Can I do my quick comments?
Go ahead.
Is that okay? I'll be really quick. I'm trying to get used to this new thing. So I 100% love and support the idea of doing this. It really will make, for us, I believe as council, especially when we're out, you know, and about, and we have access to a module like that, and we're having discussions with people, it'll give us the ability to say, here's where it's at, here's where it's been, and the way that I understand it, we'll know how many days it's even been assigned and that going forward. I just think that is one of the best uses of municipal modernization dollars we could actually use. It'll benefit all of our citizens, and I believe it'll benefit staff and council too.
But now that's the service integration extension program
Yep.
that you're talking
Yeah,
about, right?
that is what I'm talking about.
Okay, but before you go on, you're indicating that it'll be a period of time before we can do that.
I would suggest we wait to do that as part of our 2020 budget as opposed to using modernization money. We have an operational budget within administration to handle purchasing this particular module.
Yeah, but it is a good use of that modernization money, go ahead.
Would that timeline to get it into the budget, would that benefit staff so that you become accustomed with the program and we're not, you know, that way when if it doesn't appear until the new year for council to start using, would that give staff enough time to be comfortable with it before you try to throw it at us? Would that
I
make
think
sense for that distance?
Yeah, through the chair, I think for the most part, like I say, several of the department managers and even frontline staff are using it. Just, we're trying to really encourage, I mean, the bylaw officer finds, I guess because he's only got the 10 hours that he finds a difficulty, it's administratively burdensome to him. So we're just trying to make that less burdensome, so he takes, and uses it as his notebook as opposed to using a notebook, where then he has to translate it onto something that we can create a report from for council.
Yeah, so it'll make life.
It should, and it's a centralized database that anybody can access. That's in terms of every staff member who has access to it. So, you know, like if someone's away, then someone else can still reach into that file and see what's going on.
Welcome to 2019.
Yeah.
It seems to me like it's almost crazy that we don't already have this. You know, like that it's taking taken this long and that we still do it the old way. I mean, I know why the old way works well, but from a a modernization and an efficiency, we've had all these discussions. My only other note that I made out of concern was, because I 100% support that, and if you moved a recommendation tonight, I would have supported it, was should we, and I guess by the sounds of it, we are gonna wait, but should it be something that we're waiting to hear back from our consultant on, to see if they actually advise us on doing something like this? We are spending a lot of money on that
Through the service delivery
consultant.
review, is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Oh, possibly. Although I think the customer integration module, I think we'd be further along to make sure that database that I'm uploading in is available, so that when they go to click on their property, it's in there, as opposed to them adding it, then it's, you know what I mean?
Yep.
If it's not, if their property isn't in there, then I think we end up having to, we're creating a bigger database that maybe is incorrect. Street is in there as ST, or street is in there as STREET,
Sure.
or, various versions of the way the road itself is delineated in the database, so.
Anybody else making a comment? Go ahead.
Is there any urgency for cost, or does cost tend to stay, is it something that we would see an appreciable increase if we waited until April next year when budget gets approved, or March maybe when it gets approved? Is there going to be much of a change in price between now and then?
The quote I got was for October 1st, but I have not seen citywide, especially PSD has been really good with us in pricing, because we have purchased a lot of the modules that they have, so I can't see a big increase. And if we go through budget and we, like I say, we have budget dollars right now between the roadmap, asset roadmap and our regular citywide, that there wouldn't be a change, it'd be actually a decrease in our IT budget in admin for 2020, even with adding the
If we wait.
so it's not gonna make a big difference.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so I'm about to summarize what I've heard, and I'm gonna summarize this in the form of a recommendation to come forward at the council table. So I'm hoping that you'll take this very seriously and very accurately. And I'm gonna try to be very precise about what I'm saying. I hope, and I recommend to council, that staff understand that there's a certain amount of frustration at the council table with the administration and the enforcement of the yards bylaw and other bylaws. And we see this system as a mechanism to get control of that and give us better feedback as to how things are happening. What I hear is that some staff are still not fully using this system, and I would hope and recommend that that staff take a more aggressive attitude to getting information into the system so that it can be acted upon. Now I hear that there's a certain appetite to postpone the purchase of the service integration extension until the new budget, which could result in us not seeing anything until March or April of next year. I sense a certain amount of frustration with that delay. And I'm hoping that we will not experience that delay and that staff will act considerably quicker. I'm going to speak personally for a minute, and I'm going to make this as part of my recommendation. I see the $8,500 as a legitimate expense from the municipal modernization money, and I would much prefer to put that $8,500 into enforcement in terms of additional hours and effort by the bylaw enforcement officer. So, we've had a discussion about this, and my recommendation is that it's time to move, and it's time to get serious about getting this up and running and being used in a manner which gives council the information that they're seeking. Now, if I've said something that council individual members disagree with, I want you to state that right now. I've been fairly prescriptive in what I've said, and I don't want to be sitting here alone as the mayor. I want to know that there's council support for what I've just said, and I'd like to have a nodding of heads or some form of consensus that the summary that I've just made is within the realm of your comfort levels. Do I have that consensus? I see a nodding and I see a nodding.
I speak?
Yeah, but I'm gonna look for nods first. I'm looking for nodding.
Yes.
I got two more. Okay, now go ahead.
I agree that we need it, but I don't think we should be pushing staff to bring in a computer program until they're comfortable with using it. We don't want to be like our federal government, jumping in with programs and then
Oh, that
having to
hurts.
come back to.
I don't think this
Fight
is,
it.
I don't think this is Phoenix.
I think if our staff aren't comfortable with putting this program online for a month or two, we should go with their recommendation, let them bring it in. No sense of bringing a system in if it just crashes after they bring it in because they can't operate it properly, so. I agree with the modernization fund, I agree 100% with that. Money should come out of it.
Last word.
I have to. Do we have, from Citywide, do we have any, I mean, I think reference to the Phoenix pay scandal was just made, are there faults in this comparable to that? Is there any crashing of that system as to why we couldn't get used to it, or is it more just for staff level of comfort?
Well, if I may.
Yeah, you can.
You know, if I may, through the mayor, it's for sure staff level of comfort.
thank
We
you.
absolutely don't wanna put this out into people's hands with bad data.
Okay,
It's like any computer program. Data in has to be accurate, or
Sure.
data out is not going to be. And suggesting that we be more aggressive is great, and understandable, certainly. You're well aware of council's frustrations in these matters, but we flat out don't have any more hours in the day than we already have. We're working at it as hard as we can. It's just,
But on the other hand, you know, I mean, correct me if I've misunderstood the briefing note and the verbal briefing, but what I'm hearing is that had we purchased the $7,200 add-on or whatever it is, the information that we would need to have would be there. Instead, what we're trying to do is put that in ourselves,
if I
which
may.
is in effect delaying the program.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, as this treasurer mentioned, yes, the information would be there. It would be wrong, because we had to do some data cleansing before we could upload it. Citywide can't do that data cleansing. They don't know our residents. They don't know our properties. We do. It's like the voters list. Yes, we get a voters list from MPAC. Does that save the deputy clerk and I from sitting down for days on end, going through it line by line? No.
Okay, but in what sense is, okay, we can get, I don't wanna get down the weeds here.
No, and I don't either. I'm just saying it, I appreciate Councilor Hunter's comments. We are working on it, and it will be available the minute we are ready to put it out there. But I would highly, I would request that council's patience in this, make sure we get a good product before we put it out for use.
can we continue on the final comment?
You heard again.
Grows and grows.
for staff's help, I know with Query Fox, Mayor Baptista had mentioned that they had sort of in-house or their in-house staff would come to help with that upload of information. Does Citywide offer at a fee or otherwise that same service or possibility of service? If I know you guys are strapped for time. If you know they had someone that could come and help, would that you know, even if it was at a cost, would that still be an available possibility?
We can certainly explore that. You know, Mr. Baptista's program required, one of the reasons why I didn't pursue it, required almost virtually a duplication of the effort we'd already made with Citywide for programming and not programming, but process mapping is what they call it. You know, so potentially, we could ask Citywide if they have that kind of assistance that they could put up.
Might be worthwhile asking the question.
Okay, about to move on here, and now I'm at item 7E on the agenda, which is the asset management program update. We have a briefing note in front of us here, I must admit that I'm way behind on where we are with asset management and the asset management program. So I did look forward to this briefing note, but I must admit that I didn't have time to give it the attention that it needed. Where are we with this?
Through the chair, as you can see by the briefing note, we have done one stage of the asset management. Originally, the strategy policy was approved. That's one stage, which is actually exceeded the deadline of what we had to do. We had it done by July of 2018, and we needed to have it done by July of this year. So then we have been, all along have been doing condition assessment reviews of most of our assets, mainly our core assets, which is what we have to have done first in our asset management plan. So roads and culverts and bridges. Part of that was going through what we call a life cycle report, which we did with the help of Public Sector Digest staff. That's attached to this particular information item. The next step that we're doing is a level of service framework in terms of looking at each of our individual assets, what service they provide, and what level of service they are providing. And then benchmarking ourselves to determine whether we're needing to improve any one of the areas and what do we need to do so.
So timelines to the point at which this becomes functional.
So we will be, our asset management plan itself will be done by the end of this year for all of our assets, which is well in advance of what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have only our core infrastructure assets done by 2021, but we'll have both core and non-core assets done as an asset management plan with all the aspects that the reg has prescribed.
And will the plan be completed to the point where we know what our annual amortization amount should be by asset class?
We already know that now.
I've never seen a report.
Annually with our financial statements, that's what there's a financial return. In our financial return, there's a schedule of assets, tangible capital assets, which has our amortization by class.
Yeah, but I don't think we've seen it here tabled.
As part of the financial statements, you would have seen it.
No, I mean, but
It's only done
saying-
annually.
I'm saying as a report coming before committee.
Right, it's only done as an annual thing. I wouldn't be updating it throughout the year. I usually, what happens is we would, at the end of the year, any of the projects that were done during the year, all of that information would be updated into the system, and then, then it would recalculate all the amortization with new assets or depreciated assets.
Yes, but.
So it only comes annually.
Yeah, but the point of an asset management plan is supposed to be to provide council with some direction as to the quantums required on an annual basis to replace diminishing or depreciating or depleting assets. So what I'm saying is that I would expect that along about this time of the year, we would be getting by asset class some sort of a report that would say, you know, our asset management plan shows that in this particular class, let's use roads or bridges or vehicles or whatever, we should be, I'm not gonna say budgeting, we should be aware that we've depleted our assets to this value and we should be aiming to replenish them by this value. And that the whole point of that asset management plan is to guide council's thinking. I don't want to be, I'm gonna say right now, I don't intend to be tied into the numbers that the plan produces, because I can see from this report that there are a lot of assumptions made which I may not necessarily agree with, but at least I would be able to have a report in front of me that tells me what the plan is kind of indicating. And I haven't seen those kinds of reports coming forward for the use of council.
Right. And through the chair, as I say, the staff has been working diligently with PSD with respect to all the various aspects of an asset management plan. And the final asset management plan will be presented later this year. So we don't have those data, all the plan bits and pieces are not all together yet for council to see. But in terms of amortization, and once we get our plan, then we'll be starting to work on that plan evolving each year with our budget. And it becomes part of our budget process, to be brought along with our budget process. But until we get it completed, it's not at a stage where we can provide it in any good shape.
Okay, other comments around the table? Mr. Bradley?
I sort of went through this quickly on the weekend, but a little more detail tonight. If, for example, like I just wanted a little bit of an explanation, I guess. Try to understand this. Page 6, and this is only as an example or a sample. The top of page 6, the life cycle strategy and model, and this is for the asphalt roads that we have, 115 kilometers. The first item is crack sealing, event class maintenance, event range, and the trigger. What does 87% condition mean?
That is, that it still has 87% of its life left in it.
How do you determine that?
Road need studies are usually a good way of determining the condition of it and the extent of the useful life.
So
What's been
we
expended.
go out and do a core sample or something like that? And,
Well, I don't
I mean,
know
I don't,
the specifics.
So it's, if I may, through the chair, if you look at this event cycle, it basically classes a road, if you do nothing, will be at zero condition after 40 years,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So typically at those 5-year intervals, you're going to assess that road, and if you're noticing cracks, right, you're gonna look towards sealing those cracks, keeping the water out. If it seems to be deteriorating faster than what we would consider an average or a normal road under those conditions, you may go a little farther and do some core sampling, and you may look at some other options to keep that road in better condition longer, so you don't have that full replacement. So you're extending the life of that asset before full replacement.
So in other words, it's basically an engineer's evaluation.
It is, it may simply be a visual, in nature, or it may go a little bit more elaborate depending on those conditions found.
And if I can just follow up with one comment, because just for the sake of my own understanding, and I apologize, Mr. Bradley, but I understand that in our road network, we've at least now got our road network inventoried by section.
That's correct.
Okay, so in other words, each of our roads now is sectionalized and condition rated as per the section.
That is correct.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Bradley.
Well, you got a brand new road, okay, it's paved and everything's hunky-dory, it's beautiful. And we say that based on some kind of worldwide studies and whatever, 40 years is roughly the life of it. But, you know, because of the way the road was built and the way the engineer designed it, it might only last 20 years.
That is correct, and there may be a road that lasts 60 years.
That's right. So,
So when you're dealing with an asset class, you set the average expected life of that class type.
okay,
So we may have a road that's paved, and in 5 years, we assess it, and there's not a crack.
okay,
So we're not going to do crack sealing on that particular road.
But you see, in that page 6, it tells us what the cost per meter is for those various functions, okay?
That is correct.
And then down below, the next paragraph, it says, end of life replacement, life cycle strategy, and the annual capital requirements, 2.8 million and 2.2 million. So it looks like, I don't know how we use those numbers, like, you know, the thing is, ultimately, we gotta take what's in this plan, or the total plan, and get it into a budget where we're gonna spend some capital.
That
And
is correct. And remember that this is not a document that is completed at this stage now.
No, I understand, we're in step 1 or whatever.
No, but we don't set that aside for 10 years,
No,
right? It may be reviewed next year, and those costs may change, things
Yeah,
things
no, I
may
understand
adjust,
that.
and then that is incorporated
yeah,
into the budget process.
what I'm getting at is that, in a sense, we start to commit money based on this plan,
Correct.
which may not be a valid commitment.
I would say, overall, with the number of sections of road at the various degrees of deterioration,
We may need a lot more money.
you
I don't know,
you would not be able to commit what is needed to bring that up in that program. It's a long-term process. So it's looking at a much bigger, longer picture. So
And of course-
Maybe I'm not explaining myself correctly, you know? Like, in the planning process here, we're allocating, in effect, blocks of money for certain functions. Asphalt roads, gravel roads, ditches and culverts and so on. And based on that, we're gonna do a budget prep that's gonna sort of drag capital into that budget. And based on the plan, in other words, the plan is gonna sort of dictate the capital that's coming into that budget based on the parameters outlined in the plan. All I get sort of jittery about is that, do we really go and look, like, we've got several roads on our current 19 plan that are being rehabbed and paved and so on. I think what council would wanna know is that we have a real good surety that those projects were actually required and that they're required in 19. Not necessarily say some could be 20, or maybe we should have done some in 18, I don't know, you know?
If I may? Sure. Yeah, I think I jotted down Mr. Bradley's words, that the plan is not intended to dictate the spending, it's intended to inform the spending. It's like a roads needs study that we've done for years and years and years. You go out, you assess your condition. What this tells us, the life cycle tells us, is that if we do some preventative work, we can stretch out the total replacement for a longer period of time, and thus save roughly $600,000 a year. So it's not intended to dictate. Council still has final say over budget expenditure. But it is intended to try to inform us as to where our priorities should be.
And that's why, you know, when we balance the two, it's important that we understand the parameters,
Yes.
because we have to be able to balance the two things. And the parameters are what are the main push behind the asset management plan.
Very informative.
Okay, I'm gonna, if I can, move on? Okay, so Deputy Mayor Deschamps, and then who's next, please?
Just
Deputy Mayor Deschamps.
So with the PSD group, will we be doing, I mean, this one was roads. Will you do this same sort of a study for everything? Like, will we get, or is it just this one for roads?
No, the life cycle had,
Like for the life cycle, yeah.
So,
Well, it's not just roads, it's roads, water,
Vehicles.
sanitary sewer.
So that, basically that, well, I read through the whole thing, that is, like, that's everything, like, cause there's only $3 values, and the biggest dollar value out of it was, for difference was roads for sure, it was
For
a
sure.
huge amount in roads, but it's only 11,000 in the one, and so it won't be, I guess, more condensed than what we see here.
I don't expect so. I mean, I think if anything, it will be expanded somewhat to take in facilities, buildings.
Right, vehicles are not in here, I
Yeah.
don't think.
no,
Some vehicles, but not
Machinery and equipment. Okay, about to move on. All right, moving on. Next, 7F, the electronic agenda management software. And again, there's a briefing note, and really pleased to see this, because I had no idea that we didn't have eScribe. I thought that's what all you fellows with the computers were using, but find out, no, we're not. And the purchase of this eScribe, as is being recommended here, will save a mountain of time for the deputy clerk in the preparation of all of the materials that we use. And except for characters like me that need paper in front of them, save a pile, and Counselor Hunter, and maybe a few others, save a pile of paper as well. So there is a recommendation here, and by the way, I just want to share with you that this eScribe software that's used at the county level, and also by several of the townships that are members of county council. So I'm really in tune with the recommendation, if I can put it that way. So first of all, are there any questions of staff before I call for a mover and a seconder of the recommendation? If I'm not hearing any questions, I'm gonna call for a mover and a seconder.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Just one, and it's iCompass. Why the difference? Is it because AMO is supporting eScribe?
You mean in
Pretty
price?
much, pardon me?
In price, is that what you
Yeah.
mean, why the difference in price?
Or is there different, does it do something different? Like, what's the competition? Are we saying eScribe is better because AMO sponsors it, or pretty much backs it?
Yes.
Through the chair, I went through multiple demos with both companies, spoke to multiple clerks in the area. eScribe is a Canadian business that follows all the changes in the legislation and the regulations, so it is continually updating their system to help better increase our awareness of different things that are going on. Such as just recently, they updated their system to allow for online delegation requests. That's not a thing in iCompass, and that's something that the province of Ontario is really regulating, as well as conflicts of interest. Once we get this in place and I work with them, we're able to develop conflicts of interest where you guys can submit them online, and they come directly to me. AMO does help with the discount. iCompass is an American company, so they're not really following the
Perfect. I guess
same
that- yeah.
process, it's just more comfort level.
Thank you.
So I have a mover looking for a second.
second.
Okay, and I have a second.
Excitedly,
Yeah,
emphatically.
Deputy Mayor Deschamps. Is there any?
No, I thought we were voting on it.
Okay, any further discussion?
Just for me, a couple of comments. Again, the second example tonight of what I believe is excellent use of municipal modernization money. It's exactly what those dollars were intended to do, is to bring us into the digital age and to find and drive efficiencies, and in the end, it may not this year, but in the end, by the end of our 4 years, it certainly will, and we will have saved at least a small forest in paper if we can get all 5 of us on board here with some of that. And also, I believe in winter months, it will keep our deputy clerk a little safer when she's not having to deliver.
Don't get ahead of yourself here. Don't get ahead of yourself.
And comments.
She checks her rooms out first when she's
Yeah.
sure what they're doing.
Okay, I'm about to call the question on the recommendation moved by Cameron, seconded by Deschamps. Those in favor? Motion is carried, thank you. I'm going now to 7G, which is accountability and transparency policy update. So just want to recognize the fact that the staff, the clerk's department has brought this forward. We have a number of mandatory policies that we're obligated to have in place, and we're also obligated to update those policies on a regular basis. So this is our accountability and transparency policy. Staff has made a few changes, as you can see from the red notes. And are there any questions with regard to the changes here? Other than a couple of little typing errors that I'm gonna point out because Jerry Morrell's not here to do it. So on the second whereas, the whereas underneath the red one, which reads, whereas the Council of the Corporation of the Township of Edwardsburg Cardinal deems it advisable to adopt and accountability, it should say and accountability and transparency policy. The D can go away. So anybody else got anything here? Second question then. Nobody else is jumping in. On Schedule A, Clause 4. Clause 4 says policy requirements. 4A, financial matters. I'm going to read it because it didn't ring right with me. The municipality will be open, accountable, and transparent to its stakeholders in its financial dealings as required under the Act. Some examples of how the municipality provides such accountability and transparency are as follows. Internal and external audit. Is that how we provide accountability and transparency? Reporting financial statements, I guess it is. Public Sector Accounting Board, how does that provide accountability and transparency? I just have the question. It looks to me like there's verbs missing here someplace. Long-term financial planning, I just keep saying verbs missing. Am I not using my English language properly, or am I not reading the phrase properly?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, not to put words in your mouth, and what you would expect to see here, what would be that some examples of how the municipality provides such accountability and transparency are as follows. Performing internal, external audit, reporting and financial statements, following the public sector accounting standards, conducting long-term financial.
Those are my verbs.
There you go.
Thanks for the verbs.
We can come up with some verbs, I have a thesaurus and I know.
Verb book, that's what I'm looking for. And the one last thing that I thought I'd just bring up, number 5, general provisions. This policy is applicable to members of council and township employees, period. But is it not also applicable to members of council and its committees?
Sure.
And its employees? I thought it also applies to committees. Anybody else got anything here?
I do not.
Okay, so we do have a recommendation here. The committee recommends that council repeal bylaw 200805 and replace it with this updated accountability and transparency policy. Any questions? Looking for a mover and a second. We got Mr. Robertson, and I'm gonna find a second. Councillor Hunter, you haven't seconded anything tonight. Those in favor? Carried. Well, I know you've been down around Gary Owen, but. Now, 7H, expense reimbursement policy update. So, looking for comments here. Before I start. The CAO says, oh no.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, maybe just to set the tone, please do remember that this is just staff thoughts on this matter. I mean, we're not stuck on any of this, it's simply for your discussion.
Just point out to staff that they forgot the mayor.
Forgot the mayor,
Forgot the mayor, yeah.
I see your name in several places.
Anyway, I have a couple of comments.
Go ahead, Mr. Counselor.
Yes, I'd just like to refer to the page 2 of the first sheet. It's got conferences, professional development, public relations, mileage, and when I go to the updated chart on the next page, I don't see the public relations that are put in there. But the public relations plays part of the $19,500, which was a total. And other than the honorarium, as far as the meetings, conventions, mileage, and professional development, we have a figure of about $9,726. So we're well under the 19,000 there. But where does the public receptions, fit in there, and why isn't it showing on that sheet?
It's included in your mileage and other expenses column.
Okay, I see.
I can certainly
No, I just
delineate it
wanna know
as
where it is,
separate,
that's
but
all.
it's part of that other
Okay,
expense.
so it fits in there.
Yes,
So, as far as the 19,500, at this point in time, at this point of the year, mid-September almost, we're still about $10,000 to the good.
You can't read that from this.
I did.
he just added, he did some addition, I think.
Big pardon?
I'm pretty sure Counselor Cameron did some addition.
Must have, because
Yes.
on the first page, there's no, oh, I see what you did, just from the adding the honorarium.
Yeah, not adding the honorariums. The honorariums aren't showing in the first page,
No.
so.
Any other discussion here? Counselor Hunter?
I have one discussion. We discussed this a long time ago. Council remuneration, the last time it was adjusted was in 2010. And at that time it was discussed about, with quite a bump at that time, because it hadn't been, pay hadn't been changed for some 15 years before. And I think it was your council at the time that was on at the time that budgeted to change it, and then you come on the next council with me when I was on there that we raised it. We discussed it at that time, but it never seemed to take traction about setting it, as some of the other townships do, that there's an incremental cost of living increase in the remuneration every year with it. It was up 2%, paid, it was up 2% along the way, that you don't end up, as we are now, 10 years later. And if you look at the other council pays around, we were above them, now we fell below pretty near all of them, and now with a 1/3 remuneration tax expense taken away, most of us out of that, the council, I'll use it as a pay out of the $10,000, that mostly means now that that's really about $8,500, because you're gonna be paying $1,500 in tax that we didn't pay before, so, I think someplace in the next year's budget, we need to, come back to this and discuss the pay levels and get some kind of a process set in place that councils, future councils aren't set with a task of taking criticism because they jumped their pay $2,000 or $3,000 in 1 year. That if it went up, I use it for example, if we discussed at the time a 2% increase a year, because that's mainly what the employees were getting, over 10 years, it would have been, council would have been making $12,000 now instead of $10,000, and that $1,500 or so in tax wouldn't have hurt near as much. To me, I don't really care about the pay, but if you want good people serving on council, you gotta have a pay scale that at least when they go on, they don't figure they're gonna be out money. Because right now, a lot of us are retired, and we run our own businesses, but people that work for other companies and have to take time off to come, their companies don't reimburse them for taking time off. So that pay's gotta be sufficient enough that we entice younger people to replace us old guys on here, that's been here too many years maybe, to get some young people in that feel they can afford to go on council.
Right, so Councillor Hunter is raising the issue of item 5 on Schedule A, which is council remuneration. And that's the issue of the annual remunerations. And I think he broaches a subject which is worthy of an entire, almost an entire meeting on its own, or alternatively, and what some townships have done is they've picked committees of citizens to review where we stand in relation to, say, 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 other neighboring townships and make a recommendation to council, which is another way of doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna let that issue stand. I'm not gonna deal with that issue tonight, because this issue on the table here is expenses. And I'm gonna raise my issue. My issue is, the mayor's annual per annum, as you can see, is $15,000. Up until this year, $5,000 of that was deemed to be an expense. So I didn't mind submitting just a small portion of my mileage, and I didn't mind, when I'm out with various people, picking up the lunch or the breakfast or whatever it happens to be. And I'm meeting, as you know, with a lot of people on an almost continuous basis. It's very few weeks go by that I don't buy at least 2 breakfasts. And they're not big breakfasts, but it's out of my pocket. I submit some of them. I think maybe I submitted a dozen or so this year, maybe a couple dozen. And they're getting paid, thank goodness, but there's nothing in this policy that says that they should be paid. Because if you look under expenses, it talks about expenses of conferences and submitting expenses after the conference, but it doesn't speak to locally submitted expenses. It doesn't speak to that at all. And so my personal feeling is that I would like to see this recommendation put on hold, and I would like to see a couple of people, and not necessarily me, better not me, that would sit down and say, what is reasonable when all of us have lost our 1/3 expense allowance? All of us have lost it. What is a reasonable reimbursement of our ongoing expenses? That, you know, if we don't submit them, we don't submit them, but we should be eligible to submit them. That's the point that I'm tied up about. So, looking for some discussion here. Nobody cares.
Well,
I think I do have something.
Okay, I'll go Robertson, Deschamps, and Cameron.
Well, I think if you took your annual honorarium and split out the bills, that you know, your lunches and whatever you have receipts for, that should be part of that total, but deducted from it in the end. So when you're reporting at the end of the year for income tax, it would reduce that council honorarium.
Oh, is that a workable thing? From a tax point of view, I don't think so. My expenses are fully reimbursable, but I don't think you can deduct them from my honorarium. And I think I had that from my accountant.
Through the chair, I think you're correct. I mean, if you're getting reimbursed for them, then they can't be a deduction off of your income. They're additional monies.
Yeah, they're
So they
additional
can't
monies,
be
you know,
considered-
fully compensated.
Right.
And the question is, what's the reasonable compensation amount? Deputy Mayor?
yeah, just more, you know, when you, getting into what, you know, exactly qualifies as expenses and, you know, reading on, you know, and thinking digitally, you know, at some point it would be, I think it would be good if included in that, if it's, you know, not this council, but maybe the next council, that we consider, you know, one common, you know, electronic device, that it's not up to the councilors to get that themselves, that's provided as, you know, part of the beginning of their term, and it's with them for the 4 years, you know, of their term. It seems like there's, you know, everybody's, you know, you're using a cell phone, everybody's got one on the desk, I think, and there's lots of devices floating around, and we're using them for sure. I know I use mine, I only keep my paper notes just so that I have them, but I'm learning to use this pen too, and it seems the more that, you know, we get onto these devices, the more possibility, and I just think it should be one of our expenses.
Problem is, mine, I've got so much personal information on it, I really don't want it going back to the township.
Well, I think that's easily remedied by, that it's part of what, you know, what your 4-year commitment is, and that it doesn't go back at the end. You just do a security wipe so that there's no township information on, and you keep it. And at the beginning of the next 4-year term, the new council gets new ones again. I mean, that's what our neighboring townships do, that's what United Counties does, that's, you know.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, sure you do. When I sat through the orientation, you get a device allowance.
No, an allowance, you buy the device, and you own it.
What's the difference?
Oh, the difference is you don't turn it back to them.
I'm not suggesting that we turn it back. I'm suggesting that it be included as part of our expenses. But that for continuity and help to staff, that they don't have to go through Apple and Samsung and Microsoft, that we you know, we buy the same one for everyone, and everyone uses or is expected to use that as their digital guide.
Another issue on the table. Oh, we've got 3 issues on the table. Go ahead.
Just to go along with our deputy mayor there, I agree with him. I think it's something that, for councilors coming on, and we're expected to use more and more electronic, as you said, it'd be a lot simpler, I think, for everybody. If everybody sat here, if with a Samsung tablet, we're gonna use it, everybody had a Samsung tablet, all the same variety, all the same programs on it. And to really ask counselor, especially a new counselor, if somebody's been on 4 years or something, and the township's paid you some money over the 4 years, okay, you spend $1,800 to buy a tablet. But for somebody coming on that's gonna run for council, and the first thing they say, oh geez, they want everything electronic, now I've gotta go spend $1,800 and buy a tablet. I don't think there's hardly a business around that if you required email and documentation that the employee isn't provided with whatever electronic device they need. School boards, for example, all the school boards, any of the teachers or traveling ones, my daughter's been on for the board. As soon as they go in that job, they're handed a tablet. Here, everything's downloaded on this, everything you get comes over this. So I think our deputy mayor has a good point here that, yes, it may be I'll round it off, $2,000, $10,000 for 5 counselors when they start, but at least everybody's the same and everybody's using the same thing, so.
Okay, so I got 3 issues on the table. Council remuneration annual, reimbursable expenses, and now tablets and electronic devices. Councillor Cameron, I hope you're not gonna muddy the water.
No, I'm gonna get away from the electronics, just for a moment. I'd just like some clarification. Reading the new Schedule A of the new bylaw, under number 2, scope, it says, the policy applies to council members. And Schedule A is part of that policy, I understand that. And then we have B, the following segments of this policy apply to municipal staff. So I'm taking by that sentence that council is exempt from that statement. Now, we go down the list, and let's just say, number 5, for instance, it says accommodation expenses, which are allowable, including personal telephone calls. Now, if we go over the page, onto the policy section, number 9, personal phone calls and entertainment are not eligible for reimbursement. Now, can I just have some clarification on that?
I'm sorry.
Like why, the way I'm reading it is, staff can go away on a convention, we'll say, and make personal phone calls and get reimbursed for them, but counselors go away to a convention and we can't even call home.
I'm sorry, Councillor Cameron, I believe the intent here, and certainly this is the way it's been applied, is that the following segments of this policy also apply to municipal staff. In other words, the sections on council remuneration and expenses obviously do not, but the sections with respect to mileage, economical travel, accommodation expenses, meal expenses, do apply to municipal staff. And actually, this just occurred to me, perhaps it would be helpful if we had 2 policies, one for council, one for staff.
Well, that's quite possible, but I will accept your statement that I know that over the years I've been on council, I've never been not reimbursed for a personal phone call. I just find it rather, we'll say, hard to swallow.
To be honest,
on that one.
this policy was initially developed well before we all carried those.
I understand, because we don't pay for them anybody, so. Well,
Nobody
we do.
uses,
We
nobody
do,
uses the
but
phone in the room anymore.
nobody uses the phone in the room, you're absolutely right.
Maybe, I wonder, Mr. Mayor, if I may suggest that staff take this back and segregate the 2 policies. Perhaps it would help focus the discussion if we had council separate from staff.
Well, I'd like to see the same policy, although it may,
Schedule A.
one
Schedule B.
policy, Schedule A, one
Yeah.
Schedule B, so that they're comparable. Is everybody agreeable to that approach?
I agree.
Okay, let's get this item off the table and go with that recommendation. And then I'm prepared to go on to item number 8 on the agenda, which is councillor inquiries and notices of motion. And I see councillor Dillabaugh is up for a notice of motion.
I would like to inquire for a moment.
Okay, so councillor Dillabaugh first.
I just, this motion that I have in front of me, it's not the one that I want to do. Well, I want the Legion Way in it. I don't want just grants in whole township. I want like the committee, can I read it first and then what you have and what I want?
Go ahead with what you want, Councilor Dillabaugh. It doesn't matter what Rebecca brings down.
I like that.
Yes, go ahead.
That the committee recommends the council direct staff to investigate the township's eligibility for any grants for the Legion Way with the assistance of 2 members of council and a third-party consultant to be paid up to $15,000.
Okay, so, so Counselor Dillabaugh is putting that forward as a notice of motion. I take it as a notice of motion to strike a committee, that's what I'm hearing, basically. But I don't know where the $15,000 comes in on the motion. Okay, so what are you suggesting on the 15,000? You're looking for improvements of some sort.
That's right, for the Legion Way. And
Okay,
looking-
Legion Way is a street.
The Legion Way down to Legion, I guess, Legion Way at the park, I guess I should put it, Legion Park.
Well, there are 2 parks there, one called McLaughlin Park and the other one's called,
Legion Park.
AC Castleman.
sort of AC Castleman. So there's 2 parks, AC Castleman Park on the east side of the water treatment plant and McLaughlin Park on the west side of the Legion.
Pavilion, yes.
Yeah, so, okay,
So we're gonna take both in then.
well, what do we want to do here? Let's get that tied down.
We wanna do improvements, I guess it would be for Mr. A.C. Castleman, is it, where the boat ramps are? Is that, or is that McLaughlin's?
Well, that's, the point is you're looking at boat ramp improvements at the AC Castleman Park,
Yes.
and you're looking for docking improvements at the,
And riverfront improvements at the I guess it'd be the McLaughlin,
at the McLaughlin Park.
right?
Okay, and what's the name of the street, or the road that goes, is it Legion Way all the way down to Conestoga?
I believe it is in the GIS, yes.
Okay, all right, so it's Legion Way, so you want road improvements, you want dockage improvements? That the gist of it? So we're striking a committee to come up with a plan, is that what you're asking?
I'm asking the council to direct us for any grants that are available.
Okay, well, we gotta have a concept, I mean, you said council and members of council.
2 members of council to be on the board with it, with the third party helping.
Okay, so I gotta get this in the form of a motion. Does the staff have enough, or do you have, somebody's gotta put this in the form of a motion.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, and I don't wanna put words in Councilor Dilbaugh's mouth, but I think there's a bunch of things in that motion, maybe narrowing it down a little bit. As we've heard, the current funding opportunity is ICIP, which closes November 12th. Doesn't give us a lot of time to come up with a concept, cost it, and then do the application. But maybe Councilor Dilbaugh would like to start with the committee and see if a concept can arise out of that. And hopefully in time for us to be able to get costs and make the application. Does that make sense?
Okay, so the concept of getting a committee, that's the essence of it in my mind.
I think that's gotta be the first step.
Yeah, all right, so then the idea would be that we would bring forward a recommendation at the council meeting to strike such a committee with that mandate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And try to develop a concept, but you gotta develop the concept and the concept criteria and try to cost the concept all within the time frame between now and, if we're talking about ICIP, between now and November 12th.
Or
Yes.
Trillium, November 26th.
Yeah, I was gonna say it, but, I mean, to Councilor Dillabaugh's point, if we have the committee, we get the concept and we get the costs, then future grants, we have what they call a shelf-ready or shelf-ready project.
Yeah, and I think that's where we need to be. I mean, that seems to be the frustration that we all felt with regard to the dockage, and I think we all understood the problems there. And I think what Councilor Dillabaugh is doing, he's broadening the concept to include roadway improvements probably as well. Certainly at the bottom of that hill, there's a lot of room for improvements there. And now, as a result of the high water, there's lots of room for improvement along that stretch as well. I mean, when you consider the damage that was done by the high water. Now, so that's Councillor Dillabaw's notice of motion. I think that between now and the committee, council meeting on the 26th, we can get that put together as a,
No, 16th.
We can go to the next committee level, which would follow the procedure by law almost, with the actual motion. If you give us till next week to craft something that Councillor Dillabaw's comfortable with, and then,
Okay.
in actual fact, no offense to our admin finance advisory members, but it's probably better discussed at Public Works Committee than this one, as far as if we can get a motion drafted that Councillor Dillabaw's.
okay, so the notice of motion will come forward in draft form on the 16th and
The
then to the
motion will come
23rd.
forward in draft form.
Okay,
Yeah.
right, so we have a plan for that one. Now, we have, you said, Councillor Cameron, you wanted to.
Yes, I'm just looking for an inquiry. I have two, actually. Have we heard any more, or has there been any more discussions with staff and our contractors regarding Walker Street and the weeds and the reseeding or the hydro seeding situation? Has there been anything new on that?
Director of Operations just back today after vacation. I don't know if he's followed up on that.
Through the chair, it is on my list to do in the next couple of days.
Thank you, thank you. And the other inquiry that I have is there any timeline as to when the new SNC fishing docks or handicap docks are going to be completed for usage?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information. I'll have to follow up with Mr. Spencer.
Okay, I will, I'll bring that up again at the next meeting.
That's probably a better spot.
Yeah,
Just
that's all.
a real quick comment to staff. Yesterday, we walked the Legion Way, we were talking about it. It's nice to see it open, wide open again. I
It is,
think
yes.
I tagged the township in a post, and the, I don't wanna call them improvements, but the repairs to that section are excellent, and it looks like it's better than ever, so, well done.
I did see your post.
But those are repairs to the road surface, are they not? Not to the side banks. The side banks were pretty badly eroded.
They still are.
Yeah, they are, yeah. We did what we could to get it open.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Okay, so is that it for item 8 on the agenda? Okay, I'll go to item 9 on the agenda, so just a few things for the attention of council. So in the correspondence package, I think it was August the 27th, or it might have been September the 5th, there was a notice about the 100th anniversary of Drummond's Gas. And the date is Thursday, October the 3rd, in the Nepean at their headquarters, from 4 till 9. Now, I intend to attend as the mayor of the township where the Drummonds are from, and of course they have a station here, and I'm in the process of getting a presentation put together, something that I can leave with them for their wall or their hanging. I'm gonna get it made by Metal Graphics in Prescott. So, just in case there are any members of council that would like to come with me, 4 to 9 on October the 5th in Nepean. Next item. I did report on the IJC meetings, and I think I did report on the August 27th meeting where the IJC and their staff met with the MP, the MPP, and the mayors of all of the river townships. And also the mayor of Brockville, the mayor of Gananoque, and the mayor of Prescott. Now, at that meeting, the MP, Mr. Barrett, pushed very hard for open and transparent and public meetings. And the IJC indicated at the time that they're restricted by legislation that they cannot host any kind of public functions during the writ period leading up to the election. Now, the writ hasn't been dropped yet, but it's anticipated, we're only 45 days away from the election, probably be sometime this week. The IJC is meeting this whole week in British Columbia because, as you know, they oversee several river boards, not the least of which is the Fraser River, and there's a dozen of them. And so there was none of the IJC members that were available to any kind of a meeting this week because of that meeting in British Columbia, and they don't anticipate that they'll be able to do anything before the election. So they have promised me, not they, but I have assurances again today that they do intend to hold those meetings, but it won't be until after the election. One of the things that they will be doing, and I hope they're not trying to duck out from public meetings, they're intending to host a webinar for people, riparians, people who live on both sides of the river. And it will be conducted in such a way that everybody that's involved in this year's flood can participate. So that's what I'm told. As far as the river board itself is concerned, they've reduced the flows to 9,780 cubic meters a second from 10,400. Now, they're still operating at 200 cubic meters per second above the 2014 plan prescriptions. And they're doing that as an effort to try to get the level of Lake Ontario down as quickly as possible, but it's only reducing at the rate, I think he said 1 centimeter a week or something like that. So they're reducing it as quickly as possible, but the problem that they're running into is that as Lake Ontario stays here and they lower the river here, the slope becomes steeper and the current becomes swifter, and the ships have difficulty maneuvering in the swifter current. So the shippers have agreed to contend with the higher outflows, 200 cubic meters a second beyond the 2014 plan. They've agreed to work with that by putting into effect speed restrictions, passing restrictions, and tugs in place at Iroquois and other places. Next item. I sent around a notice to all members of council on Friday night that on September the 13th, that's this Friday, at 10 o'clock at the en route station westbound, west of Brockville, the Minister of Transportation will have an announcement. All members of council invited. We understand now that it will be about the Highway 401 task force. Just draw to members of council, next item, the South Nation bus tour will take place on September the 17th. It was in, the invitation was in your August 30th package. It's well worthwhile if you haven't had the tour with South Nation. And the last question to staff. We were told that there would be a session on joint and several liability sometime before the deadline of filing the report to the minister that's dealing with joint and several liability. Have we heard anything about when that session will take place?
There is a memo that we received from the insurance company in the most recent council correspondence package. It was less helpful than I had hoped for. The folks from
BFI?
Thank you. No, not BFI. BFL. The folks from BFL will be here for a risk management discussion on September 19th. That might be a good day to pick their brain about joint and several. As I say, they did provide a letter, but it was very generic and, in my view, not particularly helpful.
Nothing that we can actually submit.
Not as it is, no.
just seems a shame that, I mean, they've given all the municipalities an opportunity to comment on joint and several liability, and we haven't really taken advantage of that invitation.
I concur. I guess the problem, kind of a good problem to have, is we don't have specific things to point to in this municipality. We haven't had specific claims that have been affected by joint and several. The only thing we can say is that premiums across the municipal sector have increased as a result of joint and several liability, which is basically what that letter says. You know, maybe we'll bring that forward next week to talk about, but.
Well, there's one other concept that I was kind of hoping we would bring forward, and that is that I think, and maybe I'm only speaking for myself, but I think it influences not only members of council, but staff as well. I think of things like the proposal that we had at one point for a toboggan run. And we backed away from that proposal partly because of the risk that we're exposed to under joint and several liability. So not only does it affect us from the point of view of claims experience, it also affects us from the point of view of service delivery, because we become risk averse in our delivery of services.
Right.
And at least we could make that point.
Which is why I suggested possibly in our meeting on the 19th with the insurers, that's a good time to talk about that. How much does it affect our willingness to take on risk? And it's hard to quantify, and really the government has been asking for, you know, specific instances, and maybe that's a good one.
So the deadline, I think, for filing is September the 26th?
26th or 27th, I've forgotten. It's sometime right in there now.
Okay.
You know, Mr. Mayor, just a comment, that kind of a clause appears in almost every contract, commercial contract, joint and several, liability. It's awful difficult to get it out of there, out of a contract, that is. And in a lot of cases, in my experience, working with that for many years, is that if you have projects which you have subtending contractors, etc., you flow through the joint and several to them. Essentially, the clause allows everybody to sue everybody, okay, if there's a problem. So you say, well, okay, that guy, you know, provided a deficient ladder or whatever, he fell, broke his hip, well, you know, the ladder company gets sued, everybody and their brother gets sued, okay, because nobody wants to stick down to who actually created the problem, but.
No, but in our case, we pay.
Yeah.
Even though we're deemed to be 1%
I know.
liable, we can end up taking the whole cost.
I know, a fine example, slips and falls, okay? We're in our family business, slips and falls. Every year, there's claims that we're just caught up in the storm of
Yeah.
joint and several. The insurance premiums have gone over the past 7 or 8 years from like 8,000 a year, 33,000 a year this year.
From 8 to 33.
Over a period of about several, 5 or 6 years. Big problem.
Okay, I'm gonna move on here. I mean, I just hope that we can get ourselves to the point of making a submission. I'm going to item 10 on the agenda, which is the question period. I see there's nobody present.
I have one question, just information. 401 EDR signs, the temporary ones, all over the place.
Yep.
Is there some plan to make them permanent, or are they there for the balance of the year?
Okay, so the quick background is that when County Road 2 became a single lane on September the 3rd, the contractor was closing not only a county road, but an EDR. And because the contractor was closing an EDR, MTO requires that there be 3 alternatives. So a company was hired to develop the 3 alternatives and to develop the signage plan for those 3 alternatives. Now it ended up that the port is going to pay half that cost, and the other half is going to be shared with the United Counties, because United Counties is gonna close the road in the same place next year. So those signs will be there for at least an 18-month period. Any other questions? No closed session, we had it before the meeting. Chair's looking for the motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Counselor Dillabaugh, seconded by Counselor Cameron. Those in favor?
Oh, great.
Motion is carried.